From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Wednesday, May 7th, and here are today's headlines. Legislation advanced by the Vermont House yesterday includes an income tax exemption on military pensions. The bill would target nearly $4 million in tax relief toward former service members. Gregory Knight, the Adjutant General of the Vermont National Guard, says Vermont is one of the few states that taxes military pensions. He says the proposed exemption would help Vermont recruit more military retirees, many of whom retire from service in their 40s and 50s.
For us, it's important for workforce development to keep the talent we have here in Vermont and to give us as a Guard the tool to bring in the talent that we so desperately need here.
The legislation would also substantially increase tax credits for low-income workers without children and lower state income taxes on Social Security benefits. Vermont has joined a coalition of attorneys general suing to block the Trump administration's attempts to cut federal health and human service programs. The lawsuit challenges the authority of HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to, quote, dismantle programs critical to the well-being of millions of people. Recently, Kennedy announced sweeping cuts at the Centers for Disease Control and a number of substance abuse and mental health programs. Those moves resulted in the immediate termination of roughly 10,000 workers. Vermont Attorney General Charity Clark says the suit contends that only Congress has the authority to make such budget changes.
And our system says Congress gets to establish and fund these programs, and they have. The president does not have the authority to step in and say, no, I have a different idea. I don't like your idea. That's not what the system has laid out for each of us.
The lawsuit calls for the cuts to be restored and for all of the workers to be rehired. Today marks the start of the conclave in Rome, when the College of Cardinals will sequester in the Vatican until a new pope is elected. It follows the death of Pope Francis last month from a stroke, followed immediately by cardiac arrest. Father Brian Cummings ministers at St. Michael's College. He was also on sabbatical in Rome the day Pope Francis died and had celebrated Easter Mass with the pontiff the day before. Father Cummings declined to speculate on who might be the new pope, but he says he hopes the new leader of the Catholic Church will carry forward some of Pope Francis's initiatives.
That sense of style, that sense of inclusion, that sense of dialogue, of bringing world leaders together, bringing communities together, bringing people who feel estranged or unwanted or unwelcome, making sure that they know that the invite is always there to come into the tent and to be part of the Catholic faith.
The new pope must be elected by a 2/3 majority vote. Americans and permanent residents looking to pass through airport security or enter a federal government building will need real ID-compliant identification starting today. The change stems from a law passed in 2005 that aimed to make state-issued identification more secure. A CBS News data analysis conducted last month found that 92% of Vermonters are real ID compliant. Coming up, the arrest and detention of a Columbia University student in Vermont when he arrived for what he was told was a naturalization interview made national and international headlines. Now, in his first remarks to local media since his ordered release by a federal judge last week, Moshen Mahdawi speaks with Vermont Public's Sabine Pooks about his time in prison and his hopes for the future. That's after this. A federal judge last week ordered the release of 34-year-old Moshen Mahdawi from prison in St. Albans. Mahdawi had been detained by federal immigration authorities 2 weeks earlier at what he was told would be a naturalization interview in Colchester. The Trump administration has said Mahdawi should be deported because his pro-Palestinian activism threatens its foreign policy goals. Now Mahdawi is back home in White River Junction, where he'll continue to work on his immigration case, which is still pending. Vermont Public's Sabine Pooks spoke with Mahdawi on Monday, his first interview with local media since his release from prison.
Moshen Mahdawi is sitting in the sanctuary of the Universalist Unitarian Congregation of the Upper Valley. It isn't his first time here. He's spoken to members of the congregation about his childhood in the West Bank. Now he's here to talk about a different experience, his 2 weeks in a Vermont prison.
You might laugh at this. I realized that the cell that I was staying in is not that much different than my cabin.
That cabin is Mahdawi's cabin in West Fairleigh.
The cabin is only 1 foot wider and 4 feet longer than the cell. So I started imagining every time I go back in the cell, I'm getting into my cabin.
That time also made him think about the West Bank. Mahdawi says when the guard would shine a light into his window at night, he thought about all the men in his family who he says were held in prison back home.
I was not when I was in the West Bank. Now I understand the feeling of my uncle, my father, my cousins, and my grandfather. And I am now a third generation looking at the ceiling of the bunk bed with all of the names that are written there and experiencing the flashlight coming through the darkness at night.
Mahdawi's lived in Vermont for about a decade. He's finishing up school at Columbia University this spring and plans to start a master's degree there in international relations this fall. But even when he's in New York, he calls the Upper Valley home.
Does anything about Vermont, or the Upper Valley specifically, remind you of the West Bank, remind you of home?
Everything actually reminds me of home. The kindness of the people here, they remind me of home. The freedom that I have here that I never had at home, the freedom of traveling, the freedom of going on a hike without worrying that I would run into soldiers or into settlers who would attack me, reminds me of home. Feeling safe, just sleeping into my place without thinking that somebody is going to break into my house and the army coming arresting me or parts of my family, remind me of home. It's the yin and yang. By having this love and this safety, it reminds me of what I didn't have back home.
Do you still feel safe here?
There was this period where my safety was in jeopardy. To a certain level, there is still a level of risk. And that's the period where I went into sheltering in place because I was worried and concerned that I would be kidnapped or detained by ICE. But seeing the people in the Upper Valley and seeing the community and in Vermont marching in the streets and chanting for justice and freedom and coming to the prison to protest and in front of the court, I feel safe.
Mahdawi says he's seen friends every night since he was released. I asked if he's been able to talk to his family, too.
I have not had the opportunity. When your life becomes dedicated to a greater cause, when your life is no longer your personal life, that is the transformation that I went through after being released from the prison. So I had one phone call with my father. He started crying and he said, I told you, step away and don't do this stuff, but we're proud of you. Wow. So we didn't have the chance to speak, but I asked my sister to translate a longer reflection that I wrote about my experience in prison, to translate it and read it to my father so he can feel and understand that we are connected through experience.
Is that how you feel, that your life is now dedicated to this greater cause?
I've always felt this way. But now I'm feeling that I am fully stepping into this destiny, this path.
Now that he's fully on this path, a path, he says, of alleviating pain and suffering for Palestinian children, Mahdawi has taken a different tone. He's not sheltering in place anymore, like he was before his arrest. Right after his hearing, he stood outside the courtroom and addressed the Trump administration, saying he wasn't afraid.
When I shared that I am not afraid of you to President Trump and his cabinet, because I realized that this is a war between love and fear. So I wanted to send a message that if we are rooted in our belief and if we are connected with each other, we should not fear anybody. We're fighting for a right cause, for democracy in this country, for justice in Palestine, and for our humanity.
Are there moments when your hope and faith and love waver and you feel scared or angry?
I'm thinking about it, and to be quite honest with you, I cannot remember any moment that I felt I am about to give up on the idea, or I am being in despair, or I am being shaken. I'm very rooted in this feeling, the inevitability of justice. Yeah.
That was Moshen Mahdawi speaking with Vermont Public's Sabine Pooks on Monday. Mahdawi says he plans on walking at graduation at Columbia University in 2 weeks. He says he wants to send a message of hope. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Peter Hirschfeld, Bob Kinzel, Jen Jarecki, and Nathaniel Wilson. Today's episode was edited by Liam Elder Connors, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you tomorrow.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you were going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.